The human chair. Yoshiko Kayako would see her husband off to work every morning. It was always after 10 o'clock when she finally got around to herself and locked herself away in the study, which she shared with her husband in the Western-style house. There, she was about to start a long piece of writing for the summer special issue of K magazine. As a beautiful woman of letters, she had recently become so famous that her husband, a secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, seemed almost overshadowed. She received letters from unknown admirers almost every day. That very morning, as she sat in front of the desk in the study, she had to go through those letters from unknown people before starting her work. They were all filled with the most mundane expressions, as if written according to a formula. However, out of a woman's gentle consideration, she decided to at least read each one addressed to her. She began with the simpler ones. After going through 2 sealed letters and a postcard, only one thick manuscript-like envelope remained. Although she hadn't received any specific notification, it was not unusual for her to receive unsolicited manuscripts. In many cases, they were long and exceedingly dull, but she thought she would at least take a look at the title, so she opened the envelope and pulled out the stack of papers inside. As she had suspected, it was a collection of manuscript sheets. But strangely, there was neither a title nor a signature. It abruptly began with the word Madam. So, is this really a letter? She wondered, and as she casually let her eyes glide over 2 or 3 lines, she sensed something unusually strange and eerie from the text. Her innate curiosity compelled her to keep reading. Madam, I humbly beg your pardon for sending this abrupt and rude letter from a man you do not know at all. You may be quite surprised to hear this, but I am now about to confess to you a most extraordinary sin I have committed. For several months, I have completely hidden myself from the human world and have lived a truly devilish life. Of course, no one in this vast world knows of my actions. Had nothing happened, I might have continued to remain in this state forever, never returning to the realm of humanity. However, recently, a strange change has occurred in my heart. I can no longer refrain from confessing my twisted circumstances. I realize this statement may raise various doubts in your mind, but I implore you to read this letter to the end. Then you will understand why I feel this way and why I must particularly share this confession with you. Everything will become clear. Now, where to begin? The facts are so bizarre and otherworldly that it feels oddly inappropriate to use this method of writing a letter common to the human world, causing my pen to hesitate. However, there's no point in lingering. I will start from the beginning and write in order. I was born with a terribly ugly appearance. Please remember this clearly. Otherwise, if you were to accept this rude request and meet me, it would be unbearable for me to have you see my already hideous face transformed into an even worse one due to months of unhealthy living without any prior knowledge. What a twisted fate it is for me. Despite having such an ugly appearance, I secretly burned with an intense passion unknown to anyone. I longed for the sweet, luxurious, and various dreams that were beyond my reach, forgetting the harsh reality of being a poor craftsman with a ghostly face. If I had been born into a wealthier family, perhaps I could have immersed myself in various amusements, distracting myself from the anguish of my ugly appearance with the power of money. Alternatively, if I had been endowed with greater artistic talent, I might have been able to forget the tastelessness of this world through beautiful poetry. However, I, an unfortunate soul, could not enjoy any such blessings and, as the poor child of a furniture craftsman, had no choice but to make a living day by day through my inherited trade. My specialty was making various types of chairs. The chairs I crafted were said to please even the most difficult clients, and the trading company regarded me favorably, sending me only the finest work. With such high-quality pieces, There were various complex requests for carvings on the backrests and armrests, subtle preferences regarding the cushions, and precise measurements for each part. This required a level of effort and care that an amateur could scarcely imagine. However, the joy of completing a piece was unparalleled. It may sound presumptuous, but I believe that feeling is comparable to the joy an artist feels when finishing a magnificent work. Once a chair was completed, I would first sit on it myself to test its comfort. In that moment, amidst my otherwise mundane life as a craftsman, I felt a sense of pride that is indescribable. I would imagine what kind of noble person or beautiful lady would sit on this splendid chair. After all, a person who orders such a fine piece must have a luxurious room befitting it. The walls would surely be adorned with famous oil paintings by renowned artists, and from the ceiling would hang a grand chandelier, decorated like a magnificent jewel. The floor would be covered with expensive carpets, and on the table in front of the chair would bloom vivid Western flowers, releasing a sweet fragrance. As I indulged in these fantasies, I felt, for just a fleeting moment, as if I were the owner of that magnificent room, experiencing an indescribable joy. My fanciful dreams continued to grow unchecked. Here I was, a poor, ugly craftsman, transformed into a noble young lord in my imaginary world, sitting on the splendid chair I had made. Always by my side was the beautiful woman who appeared in my dreams, smiling sweetly as she listened to my words. And it was not only that, in my fantasies, I would take her hand and whisper sweet nothings of love. However, in every case, my soft purple dreams are quickly interrupted by the loud voices of the nosy neighbors or the hysterical cries of the sick children nearby, and before me once again stands the ugly reality, exposing its gray corpse. Returning to reality, I see my own pitiably ugly self, which bears no resemblance to the noble young lord of my dreams. And where is that beautiful person who had just smiled at me? Where could such a being possibly be? Not even the filthy nursemaid playing in the dust nearby would glance my way. The only thing left behind, like a remnant of my dream, is the chair I made, sitting there alone. But soon, that chair too will be taken away to some other world entirely separate from ours. With each chair I finish, I am struck by an indescribable sense of tastelessness. This unbearable feeling has gradually become more and more intolerable over time. I'd be better off dead than continue living this maggot-like existence. I seriously think such thoughts. While working in my shop, tapping away with my chisel, driving in nails, or mixing strong paints, I obsessively contemplate the same thing. But wait, if I can make such a decision as to die, surely there must be other ways out. For example, my thoughts begin to take a more frightening turn. Around that time, I was commissioned to make a large upholstered armchair, something I had never attempted before. This chair was to be delivered to a hotel run by foreigners in the same city, and although it was supposed to be imported from their homeland, the trading company I worked for managed to get the order by arguing that there were chairmakers in Japan who could rival imported goods. With that in mind, I devoted myself to its production, forgetting sleep and food. I truly poured my soul into it, working with complete dedication. Now, as I looked at the finished chair, I felt a satisfaction I had never experienced before. It was a remarkably beautiful creation that captivated me despite my own modesty. As usual, I took one of the 4 chairs, which were designed as a set, out to the sunny wooden floor and sat down comfortably. What a delightful sensation! The resilience of the cushion, neither too hard nor too soft, the texture of the tan leather covering, left in its gray cloth without dyeing, the generous backrest that gently supported my back with a suitable slope, and the delicate curves of the armrests that bulged gracefully, all of these elements seemed to maintain a wonderful harmony, manifesting the very idea of comfortable comfort. I sank deeply into the chair, caressing the plump armrests with both hands, lost in bliss. Then, as was my habit, an endless stream of fantasies burst forth, colored with radiant hues like a rainbow. Was that what one calls an illusion? The thoughts I held in my mind surfaced so vividly before my eyes that I felt a sense of dread, fearing I might be losing my sanity. While I was in this state, a brilliant idea suddenly struck my mind. Perhaps the whispers of the devil refer to such things. It was an absurd, dreamlike notion, exceedingly eerie. Yet, that eeriness transformed into an indescribable allure that tempted me. At first, I simply did not want to part with the beautiful chair I had poured my heart into. If possible, I wanted to follow it wherever it went, such was my simple desire. However, as my imagination spread its wings, it inadvertently connected with a terrifying thought that had been fermenting in my mind for days. And I thought, what a madman I am. I resolved to actually put that bizarre idea into action. In a hurry, I dismantled the armchair, which I thought was the best made among the four. Then, I reconstructed it to suit the convenience of executing my strange plan. Since it is a very large armchair, the seating area is covered with leather, nearly touching the floor, and the backrest and armrests are also made quite thick. Inside, there is a common, large hollow space where a person could hide without being noticed from the outside. Of course, there is a sturdy wooden frame and plenty of springs installed, but I made some appropriate modifications to create enough space for a person to sit comfortably inside, with their knees tucked into the seat and their head and torso fitting into the backrest, so that they could remain hidden. This kind of work is my specialty, so I finished it very skillfully and conveniently. For example, I created a small gap in the leather so that I could breathe and hear external sounds without it being noticeable from outside. I also added a small shelf inside the backrest, just at the level of the head, where I could store some items, including a water bottle and hardtack for sustenance. Additionally, I equipped the chair with a large rubber bag for specific purposes, and I devised various other ideas so that as long as I had food, I could stay inside for 2 or 3 days without feeling any discomfort. In a sense, the chair became a room for one person. Once I stripped down to my shirt, I opened the entrance cover I had installed at the bottom and crawled fully inside the chair. It was truly a peculiar feeling. It felt dark, suffocating, and strange, as if I had entered a graveyard. When I think about it, it indeed felt like a graveyard. As soon as I crawled into the chair, I effectively vanished from the human world, as if I were wearing an invisibility cloak. Before long, a messenger from the commercial company arrived with a large cart to pick up the armchair. My apprentice, I was living with only this man, was completely unaware and welcomed the messenger. When one of the laborers shouted, "This thing is incredibly heavy," I was startled, but in reality, the armchair itself was very heavy, so there was no suspicion raised. Soon, the rattling of the cart conveyed a peculiar sensation throughout my body. I was very anxious, but ultimately, nothing went wrong, and by that afternoon, the armchair I had crawled into was firmly placed in a room at the hotel. Later, I found out that it wasn't a private room, but rather a lounge where people frequently entered and exited to wait, read newspapers, and smoke cigarettes. You have probably already noticed that the primary purpose of my strange actions is to wait for a time when no one is around, so I can sneak out from inside the chair, wander around the hotel, and commit theft. Who would imagine that a person is hiding inside a chair? I can move freely from room to room like a shadow. When people start to make a fuss, I simply return to my hiding place inside the chair, hold my breath, and watch their foolish search. You may know of a type of crab called a hermit crab that can be found at the edge of the beach. It has a large, spider-like appearance and walks around arrogantly when no one is around, but as soon as it hears the sound of footsteps, it quickly retreats into its shell. It then peeks out its hairy front legs a little from the shell, keeping watch for any signs of danger. I am just like that hermit crab. Instead of a shell, I have the chair as my hiding place, and instead of the beach, I walk around the hotel with the same sense of arrogance. Now, this absurd plan of mine, precisely because it was absurd, took everyone by surprise and succeeded magnificently. By the third day after arriving at the hotel, I had already completed quite a bit of work. The terrifying yet exhilarating feeling when preparing to steal, the indescribable joy when successful, and the amusement of watching people making a fuss right in front of me, running this way and that, what a strange allure that provided me with such enjoyment. However, I must unfortunately say that I don't have time to elaborate on that right now. What I discovered instead was a peculiar pleasure that was 10 or 20 times more delightful than any theft. In fact, confessing that pleasure is the true purpose of this letter. Let me take the conversation back to when my chair was placed in the hotel lounge. When the chair arrived, the hotel owners came around to check its seating comfort, but afterward, everything fell silent without a sound. Perhaps there was no one else in the room. However, right after the arrival, the thought of leaving the chair was far too frightening to even consider. For what felt like an extremely long time, though perhaps it was just my perception, I gathered all my nerves, focusing intently on the sounds around me, straining to catch even the slightest noise. After a while, I heard heavy footsteps approaching from the direction of the hallway. As they came closer, the sound changed to a low murmur, barely audible due to the carpet in the room. Soon after, I could hear the rough breathing of a man, and before I realized it, a large Western body fell onto my lap with a thud, bouncing a couple of times on the soft cushion. The warmth of his solid rear was felt through the thin leather that separated it from my thigh. His broad shoulders leaned right against my chest, and his heavy hands overlapped with mine through the leather. I could sense that he was smoking a cigar, as the rich, masculine aroma wafted through the gaps in the leather. Madam, if you could imagine yourself in my position, what a strange scene it must have been. I was so terrified that I huddled tightly in the dark of the chair, cold sweat dripping from my armpits, losing all sense of thought and simply becoming dazed. That day, starting with that man, various people took turns sitting on my lap, and none of them had the slightest clue that I was there, that what they believed to be a soft cushion was actually my warm, living thigh. In the pitch darkness of the leather-covered world, where I could not move, what a strange and alluring realm it was. In that place, humans felt like entirely different, mysterious beings compared to the ones I usually saw. They were nothing more than sounds, voices, breath, footsteps, the rustle of clothing, and several plump, resilient masses of flesh. I could distinguish each person by their texture rather than their appearance. Some were fat and gave the sensation of rotten fish, while others were thin and dry, feeling like skeletons. Furthermore, when considering the curvature of the spine, the spread of the shoulder blades, the length of the arms, the thickness of the thighs, or the length of the tailbone, it became evident that even people with similar builds had some differences. It is undoubtedly possible to identify a person not just by their appearance or fingerprints, but also by the overall feel of their body. The same can be said for the opposite sex. Typically, people assess beauty based mainly on appearance, but in the world inside this chair, such judgments were entirely irrelevant. There were only naked bodies, voices, and scents present. Madam, please do not take offense at my rather explicit descriptions. I found myself intensely attached to the body of a woman. She was the first woman to sit in my chair. From her voice, I imagined she was a young maiden from a foreign land. At that moment, there was no one else in the room, but she seemed to have experienced something joyful, singing a strange song softly and entering with a light, dancing step. As she reached the front of the armchair where I was hiding, she suddenly threw her voluptuous yet very supple body onto me. What was amusing to her, I do not know, but she suddenly burst into laughter, flailing her arms and legs like a fish caught in a net, jumping about with a splash. For nearly half an hour, she remained on my lap, occasionally singing while wriggling her heavy body as if to match the rhythm of her song. This was truly, for me, a completely unexpected, earth-shattering event. I had always regarded women as sacred, or rather, even fearful beings, so much so that I hesitated to even look at their faces. Yet here I was, in the same room, in the same chair, no less, with an unknown foreign maiden, feeling her warmth through the thin layer of leather that separated us. Despite this, she showed no anxiety at all, fully entrusting her weight to me, relaxed and carefree in a way that allowed her to act as she pleased. I could pretend to embrace her from within the chair. I could kiss her rich neck through the leather. Besides that, I was free to do whatever I wanted. Since making this astonishing discovery, I had put aside my original intention of stealing, becoming completely immersed in this world of extraordinary sensations. I thought to myself, this world within the chair is truly the home that has been given to me. A man as ugly and weak as I am feels nothing but shame and misery in the bright, illuminated world, having to continue living a life that leaves me with no options. Yet, if I could once change my world and simply endure the confinement within this chair, I could approach the beautiful people I was never allowed to speak to or even be near in the bright world, to hear their voices and feel their skin. The love within the chair. How incredibly mysterious and intoxicating its allure is, only someone who has entered this chair can truly understand. It is a love that relies solely on touch, hearing, and a hint of smell. It is a love from a world of darkness, and not of this world at all. Surely, it is the lust of a devilish realm. If one thinks about it, how many strange and terrifying things occur in the hidden corners of this world, things that are truly beyond imagination? Of course, my initial plan was to fulfill my purpose of stealing and then escape the hotel, but captivated by this bizarre joy, I found myself not escaping at all but rather making the chair my eternal home, continuing this lifestyle. Each night, I took great care to avoid making any noise and to remain out of sight, ensuring that there was no danger. Even so, it was truly astonishing that I lived for several months in that chair without being discovered. For almost 24 hours a day, I was cramped in the narrow space of the chair, bending my arms and folding my knees, so my body felt numb and I couldn't stand upright at all. Eventually, I crawled back and forth to the kitchen and restroom like a cripple. What a lunatic I must be. Even enduring such suffering, I couldn't bring myself to abandon the world of strange sensations. Some people stayed there as if it were their home for a month or two, but since it was a hotel, guests were constantly coming and going. Consequently, my strange loves changed over time, and I had no control over it. The memories of those numerous strange lovers were etched in my heart, not primarily by their appearances as in ordinary cases, but mainly by the shapes of their bodies. Some had athletic, sleek bodies like colts, some had sinuous, alluring bodies that moved gracefully like snakes, some were plump and elastic like rubber balls, and others had strong, well-proportioned bodies resembling Greek sculptures. Moreover, every woman's body had its own unique characteristics and charms. In the course of moving from one woman to another, I also had another strange experience. One time, an ambassador from a powerful European country, as I learned from gossip from a Japanese boy, placed his magnificent body on my lap. He was better known as a global poet than as a politician, and I felt an exhilarating sense of pride in knowing the skin of such a great man. He sat on me and spoke for about 10 minutes with 2 or 3 fellow countrymen before getting up and leaving. Of course, I had no idea what he was saying, but every time he gestured, his warm body, which felt more substantial than an ordinary person's, provided me with a ticklish sensation that stimulated me in an indescribable way. At that moment, I suddenly imagined this: what if I were to stab him in the heart with a sharp knife from behind this leather? What kind of consequences would that cause? Of course, it would give him a fatal wound from which he could not rise again. His home country and Japan's political sphere would make a great fuss over it. What passionate articles would the newspapers publish? His death would undoubtedly have a significant impact on diplomatic relations between Japan and his home country, and from an artistic standpoint, it would be a tremendous loss to the world. Such a major event could be easily realized by my single action. Thinking about that, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Another instance occurred when a famous dancer from a well-known country visited Japan. By chance, she stayed at that hotel, and although it was just once, she sat in my chair. At that time, I was impressed similarly to how I felt with the ambassador, but in addition, she gave me the sensation of an ideal beauty of the human body that I had never experienced before. Her extraordinary beauty left me no room for base thoughts, and I could only praise her with a reverent feeling, as if I were admiring a work of art. Furthermore, I have had various other unusual, strange, or even creepy experiences, but detailing them here is not the purpose of this letter. Moreover, it has become quite lengthy, so I will hasten to focus on the main points. A few months after I arrived at the hotel, a change occurred in my situation. The hotel management was compelled to return to their home country for some reason, and they transferred the operation to a Japanese company without any alterations. This company decided to abandon the previous luxurious business policy and aimed to run the hotel more as an ordinary and for the general public. Consequently, unnecessary furnishings were entrusted to a large furniture dealer for auction, and my chair was included in that auction list. When I learned this, I was initially disheartened. I even considered using this opportunity to return to the outside world and start a new life. By that time, the money I had saved up amounted to a considerable sum, so even if I went back into society, I wouldn't have to live as miserably as I did before. However, upon reflection, leaving the foreigners' hotel was, on one hand, a significant disappointment, but on the other, it signified a new hope. Despite having loved various foreign individuals for several months, the fact that they were all foreigners left me feeling a strange sense of dissatisfaction, regardless of how splendid or appealing their bodies might have been. I increasingly thought that perhaps one could only experience true love with a fellow Japanese. At that moment, my chair happened to go up for auction. There was a possibility that it might be purchased by a Japanese person and placed in a Japanese household. This was my new hope. Regardless, I decided to continue my life in the chair a little longer. I experienced considerable distress for a few days at the dealer's storefront, but fortunately, once the auction began, my chair quickly found a buyer. It was still a remarkable chair that drew attention despite its age. The buyer was a government official living in a large city not far from Y City. When I was transported from the shop to his residence in a truck that shook violently over several miles, I suffered to the point of death inside the chair. However, such suffering was nothing compared to the joy of knowing that the buyer was Japanese, as I had hoped. The official was the owner of quite a respectable residence, and my chair was placed in the spacious study of his Western-style mansion. What greatly satisfied me was that this study was used more by the young and beautiful lady of the house than by the master himself. From then on, for about a month, I was constantly with the lady. Except for her meal and sleeping times, her graceful body was always upon me, as she had immersed herself in writing a certain work during that time. How deeply I loved her does not need to be stated in detail here. She was the first Japanese person I encountered, and she possessed a truly beautiful body. For the first time, I felt genuine love there. In comparison, my numerous experiences at the hotel could never be called love. The proof of this is that until now, I had never felt such things, yet towards this lady, I was not content merely to enjoy secret caresses. I was eager to somehow let her know of my existence and made various efforts to do so. If possible, I wanted the lady to be aware of me hidden inside the chair. And it is a selfish thought, but I wished for her to love me. But how could I signal this? If I were to make it known that a human being was hiding there, she would surely, in her surprise, tell her husband and the servants about it. If that happened, everything would be ruined, and not only would I face total failure, but I would also have to bear a terrible crime and even suffer legal punishment. Therefore, I made an effort to at least make my chair feel comfortable for you, madam, and to inspire some affection for it. As an artist, you must surely possess a more delicate sensitivity than ordinary people. If you could feel life in my chair, if you could develop an attachment to it as a living being rather than merely as an object, that alone would satisfy me. When you would lean on me, I tried my best to gently receive you as softly as possible. When you seemed tired resting on me, I would subtly move my knees just enough so that you could shift your position without realizing it. And when you began to doze off, I would very faintly rock my knees to serve as a cradle for you. I wonder if my attentiveness has been rewarded, or if it is merely a figment of my imagination, but lately, it seems that you have come to love my chair in some way. You sink into it with a sweet tenderness, just like an infant cradled in its mother's arms, or like a maiden responding to her lover's embrace. Even the way you move on my lap appears to be so fondly nostalgic. In this way, my passion burned more fiercely each day. Eventually, oh madam, I found myself harboring an outrageous wish, one that exceeds my understanding of my own place. I became obsessed with the thought that if I could only see my beloved's face just once and exchange words with her, I would be willing to die right then and there. Madam, you must surely have realized this long ago. That beloved of mine, please forgive my rudeness. The truth is, it is you. Ever since your husband purchased my chair from that tool shop in Y City, I have been a pitiful man, giving my unworthy love to you. Madam, I have a request for a lifetime. Is there no way you could meet me just once? And could you spare a word of comfort for this poor, ugly man? I do not wish for anything more than that. I am far too ugly and utterly tarnished to desire such things. Please, please hear the earnest plea of the most unfortunate man in the world. Last night, I slipped out of my house to write this letter. It is very dangerous for me to make such a request of you face to face, and it is something I could never do. And now, as you read this letter, I am wandering around your house with a pale face, worried. If you should grant this most impudent request of mine, please place your handkerchief on the pot of dianthus by the study window. That will be the signal for me to come to the front door as an unassuming visitor. And this strange letter was concluded with a fervent prayer. As Kaika read about halfway through the letter, she turned pale with a terrible premonition. Unconsciously, she stood up and fled from the study, where the eerie armchair was placed, and came to the living room of the Japanese-style house. She considered not reading the latter part of the letter and tearing it up instead, but somehow, still feeling uneasy, she continued to read on at the small desk in the living room. Her premonition was indeed correct. What a terrifying fact this was! In the armchair where she sat every day, there was a man she did not know hidden inside. Oh, how creepy. She felt as if cold water had been poured over her back, and a dreadful chill washed over her. Even now, the strange shudder would not cease. She was so overwhelmed that she sat there in a daze, completely at a loss about what to do. She thought of examining the chair, wondering how such a disturbing thing could happen. Even if there was no longer a person there, surely there would still be filthy remnants of food or other things left behind that were associated with him. "Madam, here is a letter for you." Startled, she turned around to see a maid holding what seemed to be a newly delivered envelope. Kaika took it unconsciously and tried to open it, but upon seeing the address written on it, she was struck with such a terrible shock that she almost dropped the letter. It bore her name written in the same handwriting as the eerie letter from before. For a long time, she hesitated whether to open it or not. But in the end, she finally tore it open and, trembling, began to read the contents. The letter was quite short, but it contained strange words that once again startled her. "Please forgive my rudeness in suddenly sending you this letter. I am an avid reader of your works. What I have sent separately is my humble creation. If you could kindly look it over and offer your critique, I would be most grateful. For certain reasons, I posted the manuscript before writing this letter, so I assume you may have already seen it. What did you think of it? If my humble work has managed to leave even a small impression on you, nothing could make me happier. I deliberately left it out in the manuscript, but I am considering giving it the title The Human Chair. Without further ado, I beg your pardon for my impudence in making this request. Yours sincerely,